Good morning, everyone. I am pleased to be here today with Dr. Deena Hinshaw, Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, to provide an update on school reentry. This week, schools across Alberta began reopening their doors to students, operating under Alberta's robust school reentry plan. I want to offer my sincere thanks to teachers, administrators, staff, and school boards for the tremendous amount of work put into making this reentry plan possible. Our comprehensive reentry plan, which was developed in consultation with our education system, which has support of our school superintendents and school boards, and was reviewed and approved by our Chief Medical Officer of Health, will allow our students and staff to return to school safely with important public health and safety measures in place. Now, I know that many teachers and parents are concerned about returning to school. This is normal. After all, these same concerns are being raised right across the country and right across the world. That is why my department and Dr. Hinshaw's team have both closely followed school openings in other jurisdictions and around the world, so that we can learn from their experiences. These experiences have helped inform both our education decisions and our public health guidance. Before I get to the crux of today's announcement, I would like to reiterate everything Alberta's government has done to date to ensure a safe and successful return to school. After recognizing the evolving, serious nature of COVID-19 and being the first province in Canada to cancel classes indefinitely in March, and further rolling out teacher-directed at-home learning for Alberta students, we quickly got to work to develop our plan for school reentry. Between March and June, my department engaged our education system and developed 3 possible scenarios for school reentry, releasing those scenarios to the public on June 10th, 2020. Over the following month, we continued to work with our education system, and on July 21st, we announced that for the 2020-21 school year, schools would reopen to students under Scenario 1, near normal operations with health measures, and we committed to continuing to adapt our plans as public health guidance evolved. Just a few weeks later, on August 4th, we did just that. Based on emerging advice from Dr. Hinshaw, Alberta's government announced that masks would be required for all students in grades 4 to 12, as well as all staff, when physical distancing could not be maintained, including in all shared and common spaces. To support this shift in public health advice, we also announced that the government would provide 1.6 million reusable masks, 2 for every teacher, student, and staff member, 90,000 face shields, 1 for every teacher and staff member, 2 contactless thermometers for every school, 477,000 litres of child-safe sanitizer to be distributed to every school, and 114,500 disposable masks for every school to have on hand. To date, our investment in PPE for schools totals over $10 million. Our government support for a safe reentry does not end here. As part of Alberta's economic recovery plan, we also made an unprecedented investment in school maintenance and renewal projects by accelerating an additional $250 million in capital maintenance and renewal funding. School authorities were given the flexibility to select the projects they received funding for. And of that $250 million, our school authorities identified over $15 million worth of projects to help enhance schools for a COVID-19 learning environment, as well as approximately $44 million to address HVAC and ventilation system upgrades. Both of these investments, $10 million in PPE and $250 million in accelerated capital maintenance and renewal funding, were on top of the $120 million increase in operating funding for the upcoming school year given to school boards. Additionally, I have also, as I previously stated, I have authorized the use of school board reserves for COVID-19 related expenditures. Across Alberta, there is roughly $363 million sitting in school board reserve funding available. As you can see, we have not hesitated to support our school authorities to ensure a safe return for our students. The safety and well-being of our staff and our students has been and continues to be and will always be my #1 priority. That is why, as the Premier reiterated yesterday, we are still committed to ensuring that our school authorities have the supports and resources they require to ensure the safety of our staff and our students. If our schools need additional resources, we will, as we already have, make those resources available. This brings me and brings us to today's announcement. As many of you know, last week the federal government announced that they would be transferring funding to each province to support a safe return to school. Alberta's share of that fund is approximately $262 million. This funding is in addition to the significant investments I just highlighted by our province. The majority of this funding, $250 million, will be distributed to school authorities based on a per-student model. School authorities, based on the parameters set out by the federal government, must use this funding to support additional COVID-related costs in one or more of the following areas: staffing, adapting learning spaces and personal protective equipment, cleaning and safety considerations for schools and buses, supports for special needs students, and online learning and teacher training. The remaining $12 million in funding will be dedicated to support school authorities who are seeing a large influx in enrollment due to increased demand for their online and/or distance learning programs. Since last week's announcement by the federal government, I've had numerous conversations with education stakeholders, school boards, disability advocates, and school administrators about how this funding would be best used. Based on those conversations and the guidelines of the federal government, and the guidelines which the federal government has set out, I believe that this approach is the fairest and most equitable way to disperse the funding. I have directed my department to ensure this funding immediately flows to school authorities once it is received from the federal government. They will be transferring the funds to the province in 2 phases, once in September and once later in the school year. I want to take this opportunity to thank the federal government for supporting a safe re-entry of students not only in Alberta, but right across Canada. I want to conclude by stressing once again that Alberta's government remains ready to support our school authorities to ensure that they have the resources they require to ensure a safe and successful return to school for our students. Both my office and my department continue to have an open line of communication with our education system, and I look forward to continuing to work with everyone as we work to navigate our new COVID-19 learning environment. I would like to now turn it over to Dr. Hinshaw to provide some further remarks.
Thank you, Minister. And I would like to start by echoing Minister LaGrange's thanks to teachers, staff, students, and parents for all doing their part as we return to school. I know COVID-19 has demanded Herculean efforts from schools over the past 6 months. Over the summer, teachers and staff have worked tirelessly to apply our public health guidance to prepare for a return to the classroom. These are not easy things to do. This is back-to-school week for much of the province, and I know that many Albertans continue to have worries. This is natural. As I have said before, we are living in an unprecedented time, and there are no risk-free options when it comes to COVID-19. This includes not just risks from COVID-19, but also the risks that our control measures introduce. As we move into a new normal of living with COVID, we must consider all of those risks to our children's health. In schools, it is critical to limit exposures as well as limiting spread of the virus as much as possible. It is also vital that we support effective learning environments which mitigate other risks to our children, such as impacts to their educational and social development. Though minor differences exist, Alberta's plan is generally consistent with other provinces across Canada and many countries around the world. This includes the concept of easing distancing restrictions in the classroom to enable an effective learning environment. In recent discussions that I've had about the release of Order 33 and about masking and distancing in schools, there seem to be two embedded questions that many parents have. One is why we have not required 2 meters of distance between desks in a classroom, and the second is why masks are not required in classrooms when the 2-meter distancing is not possible. In my remarks earlier this week, I focused on answering the second question, and today I would like to spend a bit of time on the first. When our guidance was first released on school reopening in June, the distancing measures in classrooms were identical to what they are now. That is, where 2 meters is possible between seated students, that is the goal. But where it is not possible, maximum spacing with students not facing each other is an acceptable alternative. This guidance was developed after many conversations on the benefits and risks of moving to a model such as Scenario 2, where it would be possible to keep 2 meters of distance between all students in a classroom. In Scenario 2, classes are split in half. Students spend half the week in a classroom and half the week at home doing remote learning. This option enables smaller class sizes and wider distancing, but it brings other risks and challenges. This includes additional costs of childcare for parents who are working, or the possibility that some families may need to rely on grandparents for that half of the week that students are not at school, which could put those older Albertans at risk. In public health, we have the responsibility of making our best recommendations for the overall health of Albertans. As I said earlier, this includes recommendations to minimize the risk of COVID spread and also minimizing the impacts that these interventions have on our children's overall well-being. Facilitating our children's ability to return to in-school classes has a significant overall benefit to their health and the long-term health of our population. And I therefore felt that this was an acceptable adjustment to make. The second question is why we do not require masks to be used in classrooms when 2-meter distancing is not possible. Mandatory masking, as you know, was added a month ago as an additional protection, mainly focused on areas where students from different cohorts might be interacting and where close interactions happen within cohorts outside of seated classroom learning time. Masks alone cannot stop COVID-19. They are not a perfect solution, but rather an additional layer of protection on top of all the other measures in place to prevent spread. We are not requiring masking while in the classroom because it could interfere with learning and communication, which we know are so vital to the classroom environment. And there are other measures that are being used to reduce the risk of COVID-19. The decision to not require masks in seated classroom environments is consistent with school mask-wearing policies in British Columbia, Quebec, and other countries such as Germany. As a parent, I know that returning to school in person is never without risk, even before COVID. When our children leave the house in the morning, they must navigate risks of all kinds, and COVID-19 is one more among them. The school environment cannot completely eliminate the possibility of COVID exposure, which is why families must make the choice that is right for them, and there is no wrong decision. Provincially, I recognize that many Albertans have a wide range of perspectives on resuming classes and the best way to keep kids safe. Let's not forget that all views come from a place of caring deeply about our children and wanting them to be as safe and healthy as possible. I will be monitoring schools very closely this fall and working with Minister LaGrange, Alberta Health Services, and school authorities to provide accurate information regularly about what we are seeing with the return to class. If we need to update our guidance or shift some schools into Scenario 2 in the weeks ahead, we will take those steps. Health and well-being will always be the top priority. This includes limiting the risks of exposure to COVID-19 and supporting the emotional, mental, and physical health of our students, teachers, and school staff as well. We all have a role to play in the school year to come. The successful reopening of schools depends on the choices each of us makes every day to limit the spread inside schools and within our broader community. We are, as ever, all in this together. Thank you.
All right, folks, we're just about to move to a Q&A here. Because we have a lot of callers on the line, I'm going to ask that journalists keep themselves to one question each. So with that, we'll take your questions. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
First is David Staples with the Edmonton Journal.
Hello, Dr. Hinshaw. Hello, Minister. So when the masking issue first came up, there was early concerns from health officials about hygiene related to wearing masks, about kids touching their faces, people touching their faces. Some boards are asking the students to wear masks all day, every day in class. Dr. Hinshaw, what are your concerns about the hygiene around that? Is it going to be possible for students, fidgety high school students, some of them, to wear masks all day? And what do you think about long-term compliance of asking students to wear masks all day, every day? Is that going to work as a public health measure in the long term?
As I said before, masks are just one additional layer. So to start with that question about, is this a long-term effective solution? What's important when masks are added to the mix of preventive measures against COVID-19 is that they're used in conjunction with other preventive measures, but also that they become part of our new normal. And so when we're looking at schools, and to your question about whether or not having students wear them all day potentially creates some risks of students touching their faces, I think that it's going to be an adjustment. This is going to be a part of learning in this new school environment where teachers and school staff and students are going to be working together to compassionately remind each other about the new measures and about the need to be consistent. I do believe that with consistency over time, we can collectively, both the students in those schools as well as teachers and other school staff, adjust and create those habits. I think with respect to wearing masks all day and those school boards that have chosen to make that a part of their policy, again, each school board has the ability to make decisions based on what is happening in their respective jurisdiction, the transmission rates, and they're able to have those discussions with their local medical officers of health. So I think that we will be watching, of course, in all of the schools that go back to see if there are risks associated with some of these different policies or benefits. And that's going to be a part of our ongoing monitoring. But right now, again, I think we are all making the best decisions we can about the health of students and trying to mitigate those risks that you mentioned. But it comes back again to encouraging and supporting each other to build the habits in the new normal that will keep us all protected for the longer term, which is what we need to do because COVID-19 is not going away.
Okay, thank you. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is, Tom Vernon with Global News Edmonton. Go ahead, Tom.
Hi, my question is for Minister LaGrange. First, a clarification. Your government keeps speaking about the $120 million increase in operating funding. Is that a restoration of the funding that was cut in March or in the spring, or is that new funding entirely on top of that? And I want to ask, yesterday the Premier said that money isn't an issue. If any ministry needed money to make school reentry safe, those resources would be available. We've heard from teachers, we've heard from school boards both saying there's not enough money. You said yourself that we're having these conversations. Where's the disconnect? The government says we've given more money, and the school boards say there's not enough.
So to answer your first question, full funding was restored from that temporary adjustment on July 1st. So that particular piece has been restored fully to school divisions as of July 1st. As to the $120 million, that is an additional operating funds to school boards compared to last year's operating budgets. So the 2019-2020 school year budgets versus the 2020-21 school year budgets. In the 2020-21 school year budgets, there is an additional $120 million. As far as resources, we have always been making that commitment to our school divisions. I've been in consultation with Minister Taves and Treasury, notifying them that as we get closer to the school reentry, there may be additional costs. As school boards identify those costs, we have had conversations with our school partners, education partners, and over the last couple of weeks, we have been hearing more and more of what those actual costs would be and are looking to address them. So we are absolutely committed to ensuring that the resources and supports that school boards need to ensure that there's a safe reentry and that we have a safe school year for the whole school year, not just the reentry, but all the school year is safe, that we are committed to doing that. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is James Keller with the Globe and Mail. Go ahead, James.
Hi there. This is a question for, I think, both Dr. Hinshaw and the Minister. When looking at the risk of infection and outbreaks in schools, how do you quantify the increased risk in not requiring this 2-meter distancing, like we see being enforced in restaurants and other settings? For example, we've seen photos of an Alberta science class where students are seated 3 to a single desk side by side. So I'm wondering how this is different from other settings where this type of close contact has been flagged as a high-risk activity to be avoided.
I believe Dr. Hinshaw has spoken to this in the fact that it is not just the masking. It is important to layer that on top of all the other health measures, but I'll allow her to further explain.
With respect to the comment about students seated side by side, that would not meet the requirements of the current guidance, which require that seating and desks be spaced as far apart as possible and that students not be facing each other. So that particular scenario, again, would be incompatible with the guidance that we've provided, where if it's not 2 meters, it still does need to be as far apart as possible. The question about quantifying the increased risk is difficult to do. We know that in many countries around the world, they've chosen to use 1 meter spacing. Some have used 1.5. In Canada, we've chosen to go with 2 meters of spacing as a more protective measure. And so ultimately, the ability to prevent spread of virus improves as that distancing is larger. But even a 1 meter spacing does have benefits from preventing spread. And again, to be really clear about the rationale, this is very specifically because there is a greater good for allowing students and facilitating the return of students to in-person learning. So when we look at, for example, other areas like restaurants, we always need to weigh both the benefits and risks of making adjustments. And in the context of school environments, knowing that in other countries, we've not seen in almost every country where schools have been reopened, schools as a major driver for community transmission. We've seen that the risk of severe outcomes in younger, in the younger population, in children, is much, much lower than risk of severe outcomes in the older population. And so trying to weigh all of those things together, making the best overall decision has meant, again, that spacing again, must happen to the greatest extent possible. However, we are not requiring that 2 meters because of those other issues that I just spoke about.
Okay, thank you. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Shannon Scott with CBC. Go ahead, Shannon.
Oh, good morning, Dr. Hinshaw and Minister LaGrange. I've got a question today about how and what information will be released when we if and when we start seeing cases in schools. So I'm wondering if a case appears in a school or 2 cases appear in a school, what kinds of information will AHS be releasing, and how quickly will that information be released to parents and the public? I know school boards here in Calgary have said that they will be relying on AHS for that information, so we're just wondering what we can expect.
With respect to our framework for public reporting, we have committed to releasing any outbreaks in schools. So that's where there are 5 or more cases linked to a school. That will be part of our public reporting on outbreaks that's updated twice a week. In addition to that, the part of our guidance does specify an expectation that if there's even a single case in a school, even if there's no exposures within that school, that parents and staff within that school will be notified. And if there is an outbreak, we're defining that as 2 cases or more within a school. Again, parents and staff will be notified because it's so important to be transparent. The difference between that local notification with single cases and with 2 cases or more, where we're requiring that local notification, but public posting is with 5 cases or more, is because with respect to public risk, a single case in a school is no different than a single case anywhere else. And even 2 cases in a school may not necessarily be an indication that there is transmission happening within that environment. It could be that those cases aren't linked to each other but happen to have occurred at the same time. We have a very precautionary level for outbreak definition so that we're able to investigate all of those instances as promptly as possible. But at this time, those individual cases will not be attributed to an individual school from the perspective of our overall reporting, but they will be promptly and proactively disclosed to all of those who are within that school environment.
Okay, thank you. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Don Braid with the Calgary Herald. Go ahead, Don.
Dr. Hinshaw, summer's ending, or see it today, and we're heading for a hard time. I think a lot of people agree as we go into indoors with less opportunity to go outside and feel safe. And there's been a lot of outdoor stuff going on this summer because people do feel safe and they also enjoy it. How do you see this all evolving for the schools, for the larger society, as people are once again forced indoors for the most part by the weather? Is this going to worsen the pandemic? Are there any advantages to it? Could you give us a brief summary of how that looks to you?
Absolutely. The change in our behaviors as fall comes and winter approaches is a part of when we see every year, for example, our seasonal influenza response and the cases of influenza rising, and it is linked to spending more time indoors, spending more time in close quarters. What we're going to see this fall, I've said this before and remains true, really depends on how each of us takes the new normal guidance, the new normal public health measures indoors with us as we start to spend more time indoors. It's still possible, and we will have hopefully a few months of reasonable weather to be able to still spend some time outdoors. And so I encourage people, as always, to make that a part of their routines. And as other activities, so for example, perhaps family gatherings where people did want to get together and were gathering outdoors, as that's not possible once the weather does get colder and there's snow on the ground, then I would really just recommend that people consider keeping gatherings indoors small, making sure that distancing is a part of the gathering, making sure that people are supported if they are feeling sick to not attend the gathering, making sure that there's notes taken about who's present. So if there is someone who happens to be infectious at that time without knowing it, and then they're later diagnosed, there can be very quick tracing of anyone who was there. So those are all the things that we need to be collectively doing. It's possible we may see an increase in our cases this fall as we all move indoors, but that remains in our hands. And the more we're able to follow these public health measures, whether outdoors or indoors, the more we'll be able to keep our numbers relatively flat. You'll remember our attempt is to flatten our curve, which means keeping our case numbers relatively stable over time, not overwhelming our system, and protecting those who are most vulnerable to the severe impacts.
Okay, thank you. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Safe Kaiser with 660 News. Go ahead, Safe.
Good morning. My question for Minister LaGrange. Ms. LaGrange is speaking with a principal here in a Calgary school, and they told me the cost for a single online learning teacher cost them around $100 grand, which has completely destroyed their budget, and that forces that school to make class sizes even bigger and even having mixed classes in certain circumstances. So I'm wondering what kind of support your office is going to provide to those kinds of cases, and how fast can you provide a relief to those schools and districts who may be in a similar situation.
Well, school divisions are the ones that implement the day-to-day operations of schools. So therefore, they would be going to their superintendent, and the superintendent would have those conversations with the department if they have particular pressure points. As I've said earlier, we are committed to providing the resources and the supports that schools need. They are in constant contact. The superintendents are in constant contact with my department, and we will look to mitigate those as we see them arise.
Okay, perfect. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Kevin Nimick with CTV. Go ahead, Kevin.
Hi, this is a question for Minister LaGrange. Of that $250 million from the federal government, how much, if any of it, is going to private and charter schools?
So the $262 million that the federal government has given was predicated on numbers from every single school division, including privates and charter schools as well. Our safety relaunch strategy, our reentry program, is ensuring that every single child is safe within all of Alberta. And so those dollars are being dispersed equitably right across the whole province.
Okay, thanks very much. We have time for about 3 more callers. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Audrey Naveau with Radio Canada. Go ahead, Audrey.
Hi, my question is for Minister LaGrange. I want to know of all of the aspects that school can spend money on, will you be monitoring in any way how they spend that money? For example, if they're spending any of that money on something that is not related to COVID, for example?
These dollars have to be utilized towards COVID-related expenses. We do have to account to the federal government for those dollars, so we will be sending a template to our school divisions so that they can easily keep track of that. But it's up to the school divisions to allocate those resources where they see fit.
Okay, Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Colin Gallant with Medicine Hat News. Go ahead, Colin.
Hello. There's been a lot of discussion, I guess the Minister, there's been a lot of discussion about class sizes and opening up new spaces, and of course the opposition party has been quite vocal about this. What would you say in a case, building a new school for tomorrow is not reasonable, but what would you say in cases where new schools have been built and there are vacant schools? There's 2 in Medicine Hat, and there's been no discussion about expanding learning opportunities to those opportunities. Isn't there some easy ways to reduce class sizes that might be explored?
So thank you for the question. It's a very important question. And I do want to reiterate the fact that the plan that was put forward by the NDP is unrealistic. We do not have a pool of tens of thousands of teachers out there waiting to be hired, nor do we have 800 new schools, which would be what would be required to reduce our class sizes in half. That being said, where school divisions have availability of additional spaces, if there are empty schools or empty spaces in terms of schools that have not been opened yet. Those divisions are making those adjustments on a as-need basis. When I look at school divisions right now, I'm very impressed with the amount of work and thought that they have gone into ensuring that our students do come back to school in a safe manner. They are utilizing spaces within their schools, whether they be libraries or gymnasiums, etc. But going on the expert advice of Dr. Hinshaw and her team, in conjunction with the solid plan that we've put together with our education partners, we know that bringing children back to school under scenario 1 at this time is the best response.
Great, thank you, Colin. Operator, can you please put through our final caller?
Final caller is Lisa Johnson with Post Media. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. So you've outlined that about $250 million is being allocated per student and $12 million towards school boards that are dealing with increased enrollment. I just want to confirm that that's correct. And I'm wondering if that $12 million, can you confirm that money, is there a backstop there that would prevent school boards from spending this money on needs that have been outlined by school boards prior to COVID-19?
So the $250 million will absolutely be dispersed to school divisions on a per student basis so that they can utilize them for the needs that they are identifying, their local needs. The additional $6 million or $12 million annual amount that we are using is definitely to go towards online and online teacher learning that some school divisions are experiencing tremendous growth. And so we want to make sure that they have the supports in place and the dollars that they need to make those programs as effective as possible. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.